Most people believe scars are meant to be hidden, but at Love and Scars Stories, we believe scars tell the truest love stories. This is the tale of a man the town feared and a woman the town tried to own, where isolation became refuge and wounds became vows. Deep in the mountains of the Old West, it all began with a marriage no one believed in. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Some men are shattered by solitude. Others are hardened by it, shaped into something unrecognizable yet unbreakable. For 10 long years, Jack Calder had lived alone in the high mountains, certain the world had no place for a man like him, and no woman ever should. After the bloodshed that drove him out, the Red Hollow crowd stopped calling him a man at all. They called him a beast. So Jack turned his back on people, on towns, on women. The wilderness became his only company, the mountains his refuge and his sentence. Until one spring morning, when dwindling supplies forced him down into town, and straight into something far uglier than he remembered. The church doors stood wide open. Inside, a crowd gathered around the altar, where women were being paired off like property, matched with men they barely knew under the thin disguise of charity. Jack meant to keep walking. None of it was his concern. Then he saw Emma Wind. She stood stiff at the altar, pale and proud, her hands clenched tight as if holding herself together by sheer will. She was being offered to Victor Hale, a banker twice her age, her marriage the price of her father's unpaid debts. In that instant, something inside Jack cracked open, something buried and silent for a decade. Before sense or caution could stop him, Jack stepped into the chapel, his voice cut clean through the murmurs. "I haven't seen a woman in 10 years. Silence swallowed the room. Jack crossed the aisle, took Emma's face in his rough hands, and kissed her like a man drowning who had finally reached air. Then he turned to the preacher and said, calm and final, "Marry us." Now, morning fog clung to Elkhorn Ridge like ghosts that refused to move on. Jack Calder stood on the edge of his cabin porch, watching sunlight spear through the pine canopy and spill gold across the forest floor. He drank his coffee black and bitter, strong enough to keep a man upright through hard truths. It was the same ritual he'd kept every dawn for 10 years, 3 months and 16 days. Not that he counted. The hunting knife at his belt caught the light, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands. His father had given it to him at 16. His grandfather had carried it through war. Now it was just another tool, no different from the axe or the rifle, meant to keep death at a respectful distance. On still mornings, when the forest held its breath, Jack sometimes swore he could hear his father's voice reminding him that a man's blade carried his soul. He ran a hand through his heavy beard, feeling the years etched into bone and muscle. At 6'4", broad and scarred, Jack was built for work that broke lesser men. His hands bore the marks of wood and iron, of survival carved out alone. Before exile, folks had called him a giant. Now he felt more like a shadow haunting the ridgeline. The feud that chased him into the mountains felt like another lifetime. But memory kept its edge. The Vane brothers wanted land. They always did. Their eyes settled on the valley Jack's family had worked for 3 generations. When his father refused to sell, the Vanes turned vicious. Barns burned. Cattle died. Then one cold October night, they came with torches and rope. Jack had been 28, newly married to Rose Calder, a woman whose apple pie could soften any man's temper. He tried the lawful road first, went to the sheriff, brought proof, trusted justice. But money spoke louder. The sheriff had been bought long before Jack ever stepped into his office. So when the Vanes returned, Jack was ready. He met them at the property line with his grandfather's rifle and his father's knife. He told them plain, turn back or stay and be buried on Calder land. They chose wrong. 3 men died that night. One of them was old Jeremiah Vane himself. And with that, Jack Calder stopped being a man in Red Hollow and became something the town decided to fear. Jack stood over the bodies as his daylight bled into the sky, his hands slick with blood, smoke curling from the ruins of his burned barn. When the sheriff arrived with half of the Red Hollow crowd at his back, Jack read the truth in their faces. It wasn't respect anymore. It was the same fear people reserved for cornered animals and men they no longer tried to understand. "You've gone too far this time, Calder," the sheriff said, one hand resting on his gun. "Cold-blooded killing puts you no better than them." "They came onto my land," Jack answered, his voice leveled despite the storm tearing through his chest. "They threatened my family. A man has the right to defend what's his." But the verdict had already been reached. No words were going to change it. That same week, Rose Calder walked away. She couldn't bear the sight of the blood ground beneath his nails or the emptiness she saw settling behind his eyes. While Jack buried the dead, she packed her things and took the eastbound stage without leaving so much as a note. The message didn't need explanation. The man she had married no longer existed. In his place stood someone darker, someone the town had decided was dangerous. The rest followed quickly. No one would sell Jack supplies. No one would offer him work. Parents pulled their children close when he passed, and kids crossed the street to avoid his shadow. Within a month, Jack Calder became a warning whispered after dark. A lesson about what happened when good men crossed a line and never came back. So he loaded what little remained of his life into a wagon and rode north into the high country. He followed old hunting routes and deer trails until he found a place most men would miss. A natural bowl carved into the mountainside, guarded by sheer rock on 3 sides and reachable only through a narrow pass a single rifle could hold. There, Jack built his cabin with his own hands. He cut each log, fitted every joint with the same care his grandfather had once used on the Calder homestead. The cabin was sturdy and warm. Thick walls, a stone fireplace that pushed heat into every corner, south-facing windows to catch winter sun, and a porch wrapping 2 sides for summer nights when the air pressed too heavy to sleep indoors. It wasn't fine, but it was solid. And it was his. The first real home he'd known since Rose left. Years slid by to the rhythm of survival. Spring meant repairing winter damage and planting a small garden to stretch his hunting. Summer was firewood and cured meat, long days that left him too worn to dwell on the past. Fall brought harvest and preparation. Winter brought trial. When snow climbed past the windows and the world narrowed to the size of his cabin, Jack learned what silence truly meant. At first it clawed at him. No voices, no laughter, none of the small human sounds that filled shared spaces. He talked to himself, then to the animals that wandered into his clearing. Eventually, he spoke to the mountain. Long, quiet conversations with the wind and the trees, as if they might answer. In time, the silence stopped hurting. It became shelter, solitude, freedom from apology and explanation. The mountain didn't judge him for bloodshed or choices made in desperation. It accepted him as part of the land. Another living thing fighting to endure. Jack nearly convinced himself it was enough. That a man could survive on self-reliance alone. That exile had brought him peace. Then the supplies ran thin. Coffee became rarer than bullets. And Jack knew he had no choice but to ride back down. 20 miles below, where Copper Creek cut swift and clear through the valley, Cedar Falls was waking to what would become the most talked-about morning in its history. In a boarding house room with a cracked mirror, Emma Wynne stared at her reflection, her eyes holding more resignation than fear. The wedding dress was white satin once, though time had dulled it to a tired yellow and left it smelling faintly of lavender and old storage trunks. It belonged to Martha Hale, the banker's wife, lent out under the banner of Christian kindness. But Emma Calder understood the truth behind it. It was the small, polished cruelty of women who had never known hunger or fear. The gown sagged in some places and pinched in others, never fitting quite right. A perfect reflection of the marriage awaiting her. Never chosen, never meant to fit. Emma reached for the silver locket resting against her collarbone, her father's last gift before illness carried him away. Inside lay a tiny photograph of her mother, gone 15 years now, and a curl of hair from her baby brother who had lived only 3 days. It was all that remained of the family she had loved. Soon, even that might be out of reach. Her father, God rest him, had been an honest man and a careless one. He trusted too easily, invested where he shouldn't have, and died owing more money than he could have repaid in a lifetime. The debt fell to Emma, as debts always did, and with it came Victor Hale's relentless pressure. "You're a pretty girl," the banker had told her just a week earlier, his pale eyes lingering long enough to make her skin crawl. "Too pretty to be worrying over money. There are other ways to settle accounts." The offer, if it deserved that name, arrived with the morning post. A neatly written letter in Hale's careful hand, promising to erase every debt in exchange for her marriage. He was 53, twice widowed, and known for business dealings that skirted the edge of crime. More importantly, he was the most powerful man in Cedar Falls. When Victor Hale decided he wanted something, resistance rarely lasted. The wedding auction had been his invention, a public display dressed up as charity, meant to grind Emma's humiliation into the church floor. He announced it as a gathering to help unmarried women find respectable husbands. Everyone knew better. It was about control, about reminding the Red Hollow crowd who owned what and whom. Emma had searched for another way. She went door to door, asking for work, for anything. But Hale's reach stretched through every storefront and office in town. No one would risk angering the man who held their mortgages and loans. No one would hire a debtor's daughter. So here she stood, preparing to walk down the aisle in a borrowed dress toward a man she despised. All to settle the price of her father's mistakes. The bitter irony cut deep. Her father had always told her a woman should choose her own road, that she was too sharp and too strong to let any man decide her fate. Yet now she was being sold, property in all but name. Outside her window, the church bell rang, calling the faithful to what Victor Hale labeled a celebration. Emma knew better. It was a funeral. The burial of her hopes, her future, and any chance at happiness she might have had. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for rescue. She had abandoned that hope weeks ago. But for strength. Strength to endure what lay ahead. Strength to survive whatever followed. Strength to remember who she was, even if the world chose to forget. The knock came too soon. Time to go, dear. Martha Hale's voice called through the thin door. We shouldn't keep the bank waiting. Emma took one last look at herself in the mirror, squared her shoulders, and opened the door to meet her future. She had no way of knowing that 20 miles away, a mountain man was fastening his grandfather's knife to his belt, preparing to leave exile behind for the first time in 10 years. Some mornings rewrite a life completely, though we almost never recognize them until there's no road left to turn back. The chapel in Cedar Falls had never been so full on a weekday morning. Every pew was crowded with a red hollow crowd, all of them gathered to witness what Victor Hale proudly called a matrimonial social. Everyone else knew the truth. It was a show, carefully staged to remind the town who held power over its weakest. Jack Calder forced his way in through the back of the church, his broad frame drawing sharp looks and hushed whispers as he passed. He hadn't planned on staying. The idea had been simple: trade his pelts for coffee and ammunition, finish quickly, and head back to the mountains before anyone remembered why his name still made people uneasy. But the noise, the bodies, the tension pulled him in, and once he saw what was happening, his stomach tightened. 3 women stood at the front of the chapel, all dressed in white. None of them looked like brides. They looked like prisoners awaiting judgment. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16. Tears streaked her face as she clung to her mother's hand, her knuckles white with fear. The second was a widow, her eyes hollow, her hands roughened by years of work and poverty that had stripped her of choices. Then Jack saw Emma. Even from the back of the church, he noticed the defiance in her stance. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls, as if she could will herself out of the room. Her dark hair was pinned up in a style that didn't belong to her, and the wedding dress hung on her slender frame like a borrowed costume. But it was her hands that held Jack's attention. They trembled, barely, so faintly that only someone who understood fear would have caught it. At the altar stood Victor Hale, thin and pale, smiling like a spider settled at the center of its web. His sharp eyes moved constantly, measuring, assessing, assigning worth. Dressed in his finest suit, he played the part of a generous benefactor while directing what was nothing more than public humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hale announced, his voice carrying easily through the packed chapel, "we are gathered today in the spirit of Christian charity to help these young women find suitable husbands among the finest men our community has to offer." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Jack noticed how many women looked away, uneasy, and how many men leaned forward, more interested in the spectacle than the supposed charity. This had nothing to do with kindness. It was about control, about making certain everyone in Cedar Falls understood exactly who set the rules. "Our first young lady is Miss Lily Reed," Hale continued, gesturing toward the youngest girl. 16 years old, an excellent cook, well trained in all domestic duties. Jack felt his jaw tighten. Her family's circumstances require that she find a husband capable of providing proper support. The bidding that followed was quick and merciless. Lily Reed was claimed by a rancher twice her age, a man who looked at her the way one might inspect a mule before purchase. Her tears came harder then. No one intervened. No one even pretended not to see. Next came the widow. She was paired with a shopkeeper who needed help raising his children and keeping house. There was a trace of kindness in his eyes, though desperation had pushed them both into this moment. Then Hale smiled wider. "And now," he said, savoring the words. Miss Emma Calder. The sound of her name tightened something in Jack's chest. Daughter of the late Eli Boone. Hale continued smoothly. Educated back east, refined in literature, music, and all the proper social graces. A rare flower indeed, seeking a husband worthy of appreciating her many qualities. Jack watched Emma's face as the banker spoke. She kept it carefully blank, but he saw the strain beneath it. The rigid line of her neck, the controlled breaths taken between Hale's sentences, the cost of standing still while her fate was being paraded before the town. Now, Victor Hale said smoothly, letting his gaze sweep the room. Which of our fine gentlemen would care to offer Miss Emma Calder the security and protection of marriage? The silence answered for them. Every person in the chapel understood what Emma represented. Debts heavy enough to crush any modest man. Obligations only one figure in Cedar Falls could afford to shoulder. This entire performance had been arranged so Hale's inevitable claim would appear merciful, not what it truly was. The collection of a debt long overdue. Hale allowed the quiet to stretch, savoring it. Surely someone sees the opportunity before them, he pressed. Miss Calder is young, accomplished, and beautiful. She would bring grace to any man's home. No one moved. No one spoke. Emma's composure finally slipped, just barely. Jack Calder saw her close her eyes for a single heartbeat. A private surrender so small, it felt like trespassing to witness it. That was when he stepped forward. The crowd parted without thinking, bodies shifting aside as if drawn by instinct rather than choice. Jack's boots rang against the chapel floor, each step echoing with a weight he didn't fully understand but could no longer resist. I haven't seen a woman in 10 years, he said. His voice carried clean and steady through the sudden hush. The words hung in the air like the smoke after a gunshot. Hale's smile faltered, then vanished, recognition flashing across his pale face as he realized who stood before him. The mountain man, the one who had buried 3 of the Vane brothers in a single night. Emma's eyes flew open. For the first time since she'd entered the church, she focused on someone in the crowd. Jack reached the altar in 6 long strides, his presence filling the space like a force of nature. Up close, Emma was even more striking. Fine-boned, fragile in appearance, her green eyes sharp with intelligence and depth. But it was the mix of fear and resolve in her expression that settled his choice. Reverend Cole, Jack said, his tone final. Now. Before Emma could speak, before the crowd could react, before reason had time to interfere, Jack cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cautious. It was the kiss of a man starved of human touch for a decade. A man who had forgotten softness and learned only survival. Emma stiffened, startled, her hands rising instinctively to push him away. But something held her still. The raw need in him, the loneliness, the contrast between his hard exterior and the care with which he held her. For a breathless moment, she kissed him back. The chapel exploded. Women gasped, men shouted. Victor Hale's face flushed a deep, furious red. You can't do this, he snapped. This is irregular. She's already promised. Promised to who? Jack asked calmly, turning to face him while keeping one protective arm around Emma's waist. I didn't hear a name. I heard a woman offered for marriage. I'm accepting. She owes money. Hale spat. Her father's debts. How much? The simple question cut through the banker's outrage like a blade. Hale stammered, his mouth opening and closing before he finally named a sum that drew shocked murmurs from the crowd. Jack reached inside his coat and produced a leather pouch, heavy with gold. 10 years' worth of pelts and furs, saved for a purpose he'd never known until now. He tipped the pouch over the altar. Gold spilled across the wood, catching the morning light pouring through the church windows. Coins gleamed and rang softly as they came to rest. "Will that cover it?" Jack asked. Silence fell so complete it swallowed every breath in the room. Even the children fell silent, sensing that something irreversible had just taken place inside their small chapel. Emma stared at the gold scattered across the altar, then lifted her eyes to the stranger who had traded away his life savings for her freedom. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Jack Calder," he answered quietly. "And if you'll have me, I'd like to be your husband." Beside them, Reverend Cole, a nervous man who had never faced anything like this in all his years of training, shifted his weight and glanced from Jack to Emma, then to the livid face of Victor Hale, before clearing his throat. "Miss Calder," he asked carefully, "do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Emma met Jack's eyes. They were gray, like storm clouds rolling in over winter hills, yet warmed by something she couldn't name. Behind her, she could feel Hale's fury burning like heat from a forge. She knew, with sudden clarity, that refusing now would seal her fate forever. "I do," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And do you, Mr. Calder, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Reverend asked. "I do," Jack replied without a moment's hesitation. Reverend Cole's hands trembled as he produced the marriage certificate, his pen scratching loudly in the hush of the packed church. When both names were signed in dark ink, binding them more surely than iron, he looked up with visible relief. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana," he said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The document lay between them, ink still wet, a simple sheet of paper that had just altered 2 lives beyond repair. Emma stared at it as if it might vanish. Proof that she was free of Victor Hale and bound to a man she had met only minutes earlier. Jack folded the certificate carefully and slipped it inside his coat. Then he offered her his arm. "Shall we go, Mrs. Calder?" The name struck her like a physical blow. Mrs. Calder. She was married. To a mountain man who had just given up everything he owned to buy her freedom from another man's debt. The weight of it settled over her slowly, like a heavy quilt. Yet, as they walked down the aisle together, past the stunned faces of their neighbors and the barely contained rage of Victor Hale, Emma felt something she hadn't known in months. Hope. It might be reckless, it might be dangerous, but for the first time since her father's death, her future was not being written entirely by someone else's hand. The marriage certificate rustled softly in Jack's pocket as they stepped into the cool spring morning. It was a legal bond between 2 strangers who had wagered their lives on impulse, and a kiss that tasted like freedom. The journey into the mountains passed mostly in silence, broken only by the steady clip of Jack's horse and the creak of wagon wheels grinding over stone. Emma sat beside her new husband on the wooden bench, hands folded tightly in her lap, aware of every jolt that carried her farther from everything she had ever known. Her city shoes, delicate leather with tiny buttons and narrow heels, were already betraying her. They had been made for parlors and church floors, not rocky mountain trails where one wrong step could mean injury or worse. She could feel them pinching, though they hadn't yet reached his cabin. Jack seemed to sense her discomfort without turning his head. "It's not much farther," he said. his deep voice carrying easily over the rattle of the wagon. "Another hour. Maybe less." Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of what they had done, what she had done, was settling in her mind like silt in still water. She was married to a man she'd never spoken to before that morning, traveling toward a place she'd never seen, to begin a life she couldn't yet imagine. The air thinned as they climbed, sharp and cold, carrying scents Emma had no names for. Pine sap, crushed wildflowers, and something clean and distant that might have been snow, though spring was already well along. The trail narrowed, the forest closing in on both sides. Ancient trees rose like pillars, their branches knotted together so tightly they stole most of the sky. "You're not what I expected," Emma said at last, the words slipping free before she could stop them. Jack glanced at her, one brow lifting. "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure." She hesitated, searching. "Someone more brutal, I guess." "The stories they tell in town," he said quietly. "They're probably true enough. I've done things, Mrs. Calder. I've killed men who needed killing, but killed them all the same." He paused. "If that frightens you, I understand." The way he said her new name sent an odd shiver through her. She had been Miss Wynne for so long, the banker's debtor, the daughter of a failed man. Mrs. Calder felt like stepping into borrowed clothes. They might fit one day, but not yet. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked. The question came out softer than she intended. Jack pulled the wagon to a halt so suddenly Emma grabbed the bench to keep from pitching forward. He turned fully toward her, gray eyes steady and unblinking. "Never," he said. There was no hesitation in it, no room for doubt. And she believed him. "I may be a lot of things," he went on. "A killer, an exile, a man who's forgotten how to live among people. But I don't hurt women. My mother raised me better than that, and my father would claw his way out of the ground before letting me lay a hand on you in anger." He used her first name then, not Mrs. Calder. Emma. Something tight inside her loosened. "Then why?" she asked. "Why marry me? You don't even know who I am." Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting into the forest as if the trees might answer for him. "I saw you standing there," he said at last, "and you looked the way I felt, trapped, alone, like there were no good choices left." He swallowed once. "I have been alone for 10 years, Emma. I'd forgotten what it felt like to want to protect something besides myself." He clicked his tongue to the horse, and the wagon creaked back into motion. Something between them had shifted. The silence that followed no longer felt sharp or heavy. It was the quiet of two people beginning to study one another. When the cabin finally appeared, it wasn't what Emma had imagined. She'd expected something crude: mud-chinked logs, a dirt floor that turned slick with rain. Instead, she saw a solid structure built with care. The logs were fitted tight and true, their surfaces smoothed by time into a soft silver gray that blended with the forest. The roof was shingled in neat, overlapping rows. The windows held real glass, catching the afternoon sun and throwing it back in warm, golden panes. A wide porch wrapped around two sides of the cabin, chairs set to greet both morning and evening light. Emma found herself picturing a cup of coffee in her hands, the mountains blushing pink and gold at sunrise. The thought surprised her with how much she wanted it. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Jack looked pleased, though he tried not to show it. "Built it myself," he said. quiet pride edging his voice. Took most of 2 years. I wanted it done right. A man needs a home that'll stand, Jack said quietly as he helped Emma down from the wagon. His hands were large but careful at her waist, steady without taking liberties. For a brief moment they stood close, and Emma caught the scent she was beginning to associate with him. Wood smoke, pine soap, and something unmistakably masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. Inside, the cabin exceeded anything she had imagined. The main room was open and warm, anchored by a massive stone fireplace that looked capable of fighting off the deepest winter. Wide plank floors stretched beneath her feet, sanded smooth and polished to a soft, honeyed glow. Handcrafted furniture, a sturdy table, solid chairs, a bookshelf filled with thick, well-worn volumes, spoke of long winters spent turning raw labor into quiet beauty. "The bedrooms are there," Jack said, nodding toward a door at the far end of the room. "I'll sleep out here on the couch until you're comfortable with something else." Heat crept into Emma's cheeks. She was married now, bound to this man in ways she had never known. Obligations both frightening and strangely compelling. "That's very considerate," she said, then glanced down at her impractical shoes. "I'm afraid I'm not exactly prepared for mountain life. These, for example?" "We'll manage," Jack replied. "I've got a few things that might do for now. When I head down for supplies again, I'll get you whatever you need." The gentleness in his voice unsettled her more than harshness ever could have. She had spent months bracing herself for cruelty. Kindness, freely given by a stranger who owed her nothing, left her exposed. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. Jack paused, feeding kindling into the fire. After a moment he said, "Maybe because no one's been kind to me in a long time. Maybe because I remember what it's like to be afraid and alone. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone." That night, Emma lay in Jack's bed. Their bed now, though he kept his word and slept on the couch, staring up at the ceiling beams he had cut and fitted with his own hands. The mattress surprised her with its comfort, stuffed with feathers and layered with quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. Through the door, she heard him moving about the main room, banking the fire and settling in for the night. The sounds were domestic, reassuring, the simple noises of someone making a place safe. It struck her that this was the first night in months she wasn't dreading what tomorrow might demand of her. Her city shoes sat beside the bed, already out of place in this mountain world. Tomorrow would bring challenges she couldn't yet imagine. Learning a wood stove, tending fires, living without the conveniences she'd always known. But tonight, for the first time since her father's death, Emma Calder fell asleep, feeling safe. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines. An owl called somewhere in the dark, a sound that spoke of bonds that endured the longest nights. In the main room, Jack Calder lay on the couch he'd built himself, watching the embers fade and wondering what he'd done. He had lived alone for so long that the simple sound of another person breathing in the next room felt both strange and infinitely precious. He thought of Emma's courage in the church, the way she'd met Victor Hale's gaze even when fear pressed in. He thought of her honest wonder at the cabin, the way she'd called it beautiful and meant it. Most of all, he thought of the trust she'd shown by coming with him, by sleeping under his roof, by believing his promise that he would never hurt her. Tomorrow would bring its own trials. He would need to teach her how to live in this place, and she would have to learn to trust him with more than her physical safety. But tonight was different. For the first time in 10 years, Jack Calder was not entirely alone, and that alone felt like a quiet miracle. Emma woke to the sound of an axe striking wood, each blow ringing against the mountainside in a steady, practiced rhythm. Pale morning light slipped through the cabin windows. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and something deeper and richer. Coffee. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, the only ones she owned, and stepped into the main room. Through the window, she saw Jack splitting logs with calm precision. His shirt clung to him with sweat despite the cool air. Each swing sent sharp splinters flying, the pile beside him growing steadily. Inside, a pot of coffee hung over the fire, its dark aroma filling the cabin and reminding Emma she hadn't eaten since the morning before. Her stomach growled loudly. She pressed a hand to it, embarrassed, though no one had heard. "Morning," Jack said as he came through the door with an armful of fresh wood. "Hope I didn't wake you with the chopping." "Good morning," Emma replied, suddenly aware of her rumpled clothes and loosened hairpins. "The coffee smells wonderful." "It's strong," he warned, setting the wood down and reaching for the pot. "I make it thick enough to float a horseshoe. You might want to cut it with water." She accepted the tin cup gratefully, warming her hands around it. The coffee was bitter and dark, strong as creek water. But it was hot, and after yesterday, she needed it. She took another sip and managed not to wince. "I should probably learn to make coffee," she said. "And breakfast and everything, really. I'm afraid my schooling didn't include much in the way of practical skills." Jack studied her over the rim of his cup, gray eyes thoughtful. "What did it include?" "Literature mostly. Music. I play the piano, though I doubt that helps much up here. French, which helps even less." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Watercolor painting. Embroidery. The sorts of accomplishments meant to prepare a woman for marriage." She paused. "I suppose they did. Just not the kind anyone expected." "Can you read?" Jack asked. "Of course I can read," she said quickly. "I told you, I studied literature." "I mean, can you read instructions?" he clarified. "Recipes. Books that teach useful things." Color rose in her cheeks. "Yes, I can read anything. I just never had reason to read anything. Practical." Jack nodded and crossed to a wooden chest in the corner. He lifted out a thick book bound in cracked leather and placed it in her hands. "This was my mother's," he said. "She kept it for 30 years. Recipes, remedies, notes on anything she learned that might be worth remembering." Emma opened it carefully. The pages were crowded with neat, slanted handwriting in faded ink, bread measurements, instructions for curing meat, treatments for fevers, wounds, broken bones. In the margins were additions and corrections, layers of lived experience built over time. It was the collected knowledge of a woman who had known how to make a home where survival was never guaranteed. Emma looked up slowly, the weight of the book settling into her palms. Not just paper and ink, but an inheritance. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's beautiful," Emma said, tracing her fingers over a page titled "Sourdough Starter, Never Let It Die." She must have been an extraordinary woman. "She was," Jack replied quietly. "Came out here with my father when this was still Indian territory. Raised 4 children, buried 2 of them before they were grown." He spoke without drama, but there was weight in every word. She never complained, never quit, never let the land break her. There was a softness in his voice when he spoke of his mother. something gentle that didn't match the fearsome reputation that followed his name. Emma looked up from the book and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite place. "What happened to her?" she asked. "Fever," Jack said. "Took her when I was 25. Same winter we lost half the livestock and the well froze solid. My father said she just decided she was tired of fighting and let go." He hesitated, then added, almost awkwardly, "I think she would have liked you." The simple words struck Emma harder than any grand speech could have. He barely knew her. Yet he believed his mother, the woman whose book she now held, would have approved. It felt like an unexpected gift, one she wasn't sure she deserved. "I'll try to be worthy of her book," Emma said softly, closing it with care and pressing it to her chest like a vow. The rest of the morning passed in small, practical lessons. Jack showed her how to bank the fire so it wouldn't die during the day, how to adjust the stove damper to control heat, how to tell when the coffee was ready by the sound it made as it bubbled. Emma was eager, if unskilled. She burned her first batch of biscuits, brewed coffee so weak it barely tinted the water, and managed to fill the cabin with smoke by turning the damper the wrong way. Each time, Jack corrected her gently, never impatient, never sharp. She listened, tried again, and by afternoon managed to put together something that resembled a proper meal. "Not bad for a first attempt," Jack said, chewing gamely on a slightly charred biscuit. "My first cooking nearly killed me. Took 3 days to recover." Emma laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in months. "You're being generous. These biscuits could patch a roof." "Next batch," Jack said solemnly. She laughed again. As the day wore on, Emma felt herself easing in ways she hadn't expected. There was comfort in the rhythm of simple work, satisfaction in learning with her hands. More than that, there was something healing in Jack's quiet patience and dry humor. He never made her feel foolish for what she didn't know. When she struggled with the stove, he taught her to listen to the fire. When the water wouldn't heat evenly, he showed her where to set the pot. Always patient, always kind. Late in the afternoon, while Jack was outside tending his horse, Emma explored the cabin, familiarizing herself with her new home. At the foot of the bed, she opened a wooden chest. Inside lay the most beautiful quilt she had ever seen, folded with care, scented faintly of cedar and lavender. Interlocking rings in shades of blue and gold caught the light as if holding it. Every stitch was precise, every seam deliberate. It was the work of someone who had poured love into every inch. "That was my mother's wedding quilt," Jack said from the doorway. Emma startled. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to fold it back. "I shouldn't have." "It's all right," Jack said, moving to sit beside her on the edge of the bed. "She always said it was meant to be used, not hidden away," Jack said. "She made it the winter before she married my father. Worked on it every night by candlelight." Emma let her fingers follow the intricate stitching, picturing a young woman bent over the fabric, sewing hope and anticipation into every careful seam. "The workmanship is incredible," she murmured. "She must have been very skilled." "She was," Jack agreed. "She used to say a quilt was like a marriage," he went on. "A lot of small pieces that don't amount to much on their own. But if you put them together with patience and care, they become something strong enough to last a lifetime." The meaning settled between them, heavy and unspoken. Emma looked up and found Jack watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. For a heartbeat, she thought he might step closer, might turn their marriage of necessity into something undeniably real. Instead, he stood. "I should check on the horse," he said quietly. "Dinner in an hour?" Emma asked. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I'll try not to burn anything this time." After he left, she sat alone on the bed, the quilt spread across her lap. She thought about patience, about how beauty could grow from pieces that seemed unrelated. She thought of the gentleness in Jack's voice when he spoke of his mother, the care in every corner of the cabin, the trust he had shown by sharing things that mattered. Most of all, she thought of the look in his eyes, the promise that what they'd begun might become more than shelter and safety if they were both brave enough to allow it. Outside, Jack brushed his horse with more attention than necessary, trying to make sense of what he'd felt inside. Emma had looked right sitting there with his mother's quilt in her hands, as if she belonged in a way that went beyond papers and circumstance. He'd wanted to kiss her again, slowly, without urgency, wanted to tell her she was brave and beautiful, and that her presence filled a space he hadn't known was empty. But it was too soon, too much. She had trusted him enough already to come to the mountain, to sleep under his roof, to try building something new from broken lives. The least he could give her was time. Time, he told himself, brushing long, steady strokes along the horse's flank. Time to see what might grow between them. Like seeds planted in good soil, left to find their own way toward the light. 3 days into their marriage, the first sign of trouble arrived. Emma was hanging laundry on the line Jack had strung between 2 pines when she saw him coming up the trail, his face drawn tight. In his hand was a sheet of paper fluttering in the breeze like a trapped bird. "What is it?" she asked. Though his expression warned her she wouldn't like the answer, Jack handed it to her without speaking. Her own face stared back from the rough sketch, imperfect but close enough to be unmistakable. Beneath it, bold black letters read, "Missing Emma Calder. Last seen in the company of dangerous fugitive Jack Calder. Reward offered for information leading to her safe return." "Fugitive?" Emma said quietly, looking up at him. "Is that what you are?" "Apparently," Jack replied, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "Victor Hale hasn't been wasting time," Jack said. "He's pulled in the territorial marshal. Half the men in 3 counties are probably riding with wanted notices in their pockets." Emma studied the poster again, her eyes dropping to the fine print at the bottom. $500, she said quietly. "That's more money than most folks around here see in a year." "I know." Jack took the paper from her and crushed it in his fist. "We need to talk about what this means, for both of us." They sat on the porch steps, the morning sun warming their faces, while Jack explained what the poster truly represented. Victor Hale had influence across the territory, and men like him did not forgive humiliation. He had already convinced the authorities that Emma had been taken against her will, kidnapped by a known killer who would do anything to stay free. "But we're legally married," Emma said. "The certificate—" "Won't matter if they decide it won't," Jack interrupted. "They'll say I coerced you. Hale will line up witnesses ready to swear I threatened you, forced you through the ceremony, and my reputation." He exhaled slowly. "That won't help." A cold settled in Emma's chest that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if they find us, they'll arrest me for kidnapping, maybe worse." His jaw tightened. "And you'll be taken back to town, straight into whatever punishment Victor Hale decides you deserve for embarrassing him. The truth of their situation finally settled in. They weren't just a newly married couple learning how to share a life. They were fugitives, hunted by men with badges and guns, and no guarantee the law would care about the truth. "How long do we have?" Emma asked. "Hard to say. This mountain isn't easy to find if you don't know the trails. There are only a few ways up." He shrugged. "Could be days, could be weeks. Depends how badly Hale wants you back." Emma thought of the banker's pale eyes, the way he had looked at her like property already owned. "He wants me back very badly," she said. That afternoon, Jack began teaching her a different kind of survival. He showed her how to load and fire his spare rifle, how to sight down the barrel and squeeze the trigger without jerking the shot. "I can't," Emma said, after her first bullet missed the mark by several feet. "I've never hurt anyone in my life." "You're not planning to hurt anyone," Jack said patiently. "You're learning to protect yourself if someone tries to hurt you first. There's a difference." He propped a tin can on a fallen log, its metal flashing in the afternoon sun, and guided her into position. His hands covered hers on the rifle, steadying her grip, helping her feel the balance and weight. "Feel how it wants to kick against your shoulder," he murmured, his breath warm near her ear. "Don't fight it. Just be ready. Breathe out, then squeeze. Don't hold your breath or you'll shake." Emma tried again, focusing on his calm instructions instead of her fear. The second shot came closer, still missing but no longer wild. The third clipped the edge of the can, sending it spinning off the log. Jack smiled faintly. "Better," he said. "You've got steady hands. You just need time," Jack said. They spent nearly an hour shooting, the sharp crack of the rifle echoing through the trees. With every round, Emma's aim improved. By the end, she was striking the tin can more often than not, even if she still flinched at the sound each time the trigger broke. As they walked back toward the cabin, the rifle resting more naturally in her hands, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" She glanced at him. "Teaching me to shoot, teaching me how to defend myself. If they come, wouldn't it be easier for you to run on your own?" Jack stopped and turned to face her, his expression hard and unmistakably serious. "Is that what you think?" he said. "That I'd leave you the moment things get hard?" "I don't know what to think," Emma admitted. 3 days ago, we were strangers. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Jack cut in, his voice rough with certainty. "You trusted me when you had no reason to. You came to my mountain. You slept under my roof. You tried to build a life with a man everyone else is afraid of." He stepped closer. "And you think I'd repay that by running when you need me most?" Emma held his gaze, her heart pounding. Something had shifted in the space between them. This was no longer about paperwork or necessity. Somewhere in the past 3 days, their marriage of survival had begun turning into something real. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying you're my wife, Emma Calder," he said. "Not just on paper, in every way that matters. And I protect what's mine." The edge in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth through her chest. For months, she had felt powerless, trapped by other people's decisions. Now she stood with a rifle in her hands and a man beside her who would stand against the world for her. For the first time since Eli Boone died, she felt strong. That night, they sat by the fire and planned. Jack drew a rough map in the dirt. outlining the narrow trails that led to the cabin, marking high ground and choke points where a few shots could slow many men. "As long as we stay up here," he said, pointing, "they'll have to come through the pass one at a time. We'll see them long before they reach us, if they manage to surround the place." He paused. "We'll deal with that if it happens." Emma surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. "How many men do you think Victor Hale will send?" "That depends on how badly he wants you back," Jack replied. "Bounty hunters aren't cheap. But if he's serious..." He shrugged. "Could be 3 men. Could be 30. She studied the map, forcing herself to think clearly. "Supplies. If they try to wait us out, we'll need food, water, ammunition." "We've got plenty of food and rounds," Jack said. "Water's the weak point if they block the spring. There's a cistern under the cabin. If we're careful, it'll last a week or 2. They talked long into the night, planning for possibilities neither wanted to name. Yet beneath the fear was something new. Certainty. They were no longer strangers sharing a roof. They were partners now, bound by choice as much as danger. When it was time to sleep, Jack paused at the edge of the main room. "Emma," he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes, "if something happens to me, there's a cache under the floorboards behind the stove. Gold, ammunition, enough to get you to Canada if you have to run." "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said firmly. Then she stepped closer. "And if it does, we face it together." Jack nodded once, and for the first time, he believed it. She cut him off. "I'm not running, Jack. This is my home now, too. And I'm not letting Victor Hale or anyone else take it from us." Jack turned fully toward her. In his eyes, she saw gratitude. Yes. But beneath it, something deeper, steadier, and far more dangerous to her heart. Something that looked very much like love. "Good night, Mrs. Calder," he said quietly. "Good night, Mr. Calder," she answered. And for the first time since the church bells rang, the name felt right. In her room, their room, she was starting to think. Emma lay awake, listening to the mountain breathe. Wind moved through the pines. Wood settled in the cabin walls. Her life had changed in 3 short days more completely than she could have imagined. She was no longer the helpless daughter of a debtor. She was Emma Calder, wife to a mountain man, guardian of her own home, a woman who knew how to hold a rifle and wasn't afraid to use it. Outside, an owl called for its mate. Farther off, a wolf lifted its voice to the moon. Inside the cabin, wrapped in thick timbers and protected by a man who had sworn himself to her safety, Emma felt calmer than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring its trials. The crumpled wanted poster in Jack's pocket was proof enough that danger hadn't forgotten them. But tonight, for the first time since their rushed wedding, Emma allowed herself to believe they might endure. Not alone, but together. A week passed in a deceptive calm. Emma adapted to mountain life with a grace that surprised them both. She rose before dawn to stir the fire and prepare breakfast, while Jack checked his traps and trails. Her city shoes sat abandoned in the corner, replaced by sturdy elk-hide boots Jack had made for her, soft and strong, shaped perfectly to her feet. She was grinding coffee on the porch when she noticed Jack standing rigid at the edge of the clearing. He held a spyglass to his eye, his body taut as drawn wire, scanning the valley below. "What is it?" Emma asked, setting the grinder down and moving to his side. "Riders," Jack said quietly. 3, maybe 4, about 2 miles out. He didn't lower the glass. "They're pretending to wander, but they're watching every split in the trail. They're looking for something." Emma's heart kicked hard. Are they coming here? Not yet. But they're close to the turn-off. Jack folded the spyglass and slid it into his belt. We get ready. Now. The next hour passed in disciplined silence. Emma loaded both rifles while Jack erased every sign of life. Tools, wood chips, the laundry line, even footprints. Within minutes, the homestead looked long abandoned. Remember what we practiced, Jack said as they took their positions at the windows. Don't fire unless I say so. If it comes to shooting, center mass. No fancy shots. Emma nodded, checking her rifle again. Her hands were steady, though her pulse thundered in her ears. Through the window, she could see the narrow trail, the only path that didn't require climbing rock walls. They waited. The quiet stretched until doubt crept in. Then she heard it. Hooves on stone, leather creaking, low male voices carried on the wind. Jack's voice came soft but iron hard. Stay calm. And Emma Calder did. Let me handle this. 3 men stepped out of the trees, leading their horses instead of riding them up the last stretch of broken stone. They wore the look of ordinary cowhands, but nothing about the way they moved was ordinary. They spread without speaking. Hands hovered near holsters. Distance was measured by instinct, not chance. These were men who'd done this before. The one in front was lean, with a drooping mustache and eyes that skimmed every shadow. He called out while they were still a good 50 yards from the cabin, his voice cutting clean through the thin mountain air. Hello there. Occupants of the house? We're asking around about a missing woman, Emma Calder. Her family back in town is worried sick. Jack stayed silent, watching through the narrow gap in the shutter. Emma saw his jaw tighten when her name was spoken. We know someone's home, the man went on, taking another careful step forward. Saw smoke from the chimney yesterday. Just want to ask a few questions. Make sure the lady's all right. That's close enough. Jack's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't ask for permission. State your business and move on. The men stopped, but not clumped together. They positioned themselves so no single window could cover them all. Emma noted it instantly. Professionals. Name's Grant, the leader said. Marshal Grant. Federal marshals. These 2 are with me. We're conducting an official inquiry into the disappearance of Miss Emma Calder from Cedar Falls. He tilted his head slightly. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I know she married me, Jack answered evenly. Legally, in front of witnesses. What she chose to do after that is her business and mine. Grant's expression cooled. Her family claims she was coerced, forced into marriage by a wanted man. He let the words hang. That makes it our business. Show me a warrant, Jack said. There was a pause. Then Grant laughed, short, sharp, humorless. We don't need a warrant to ask questions, and we've got authority to search any property where we suspect a crime. Emma's fingers tightened around the rifle. Through her window, she saw one of the men edging left, slow and deliberate, angling for a side view of the cabin. He knew exactly what he was doing. You can ask your questions right where you are, Jack said. Take one more step toward this cabin, and we'll have trouble. We, Grant echoed, interest sharpening his tone. Who's we, Jack Calder? You got someone in there with you? The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Emma understood then. Her presence was no longer a secret. In their eyes, Jack's guilt had just become fact. Mrs. Calder is under my protection, Jack said carefully. She's exactly where she wants to be. Grant smiled thinly. Then let's hear it from her. He raised his voice slightly. Mrs. Calder, if you can hear me, come on out. Say a few words. If you're here of your own free will, we'll apologize and ride on. Emma looked toward Jack's window, waiting for a signal. But Jack's focus never left the men outside. His rifle rested openly on the sill now, no longer hidden, a clear line drawn. The seconds stretched. Finally, Grant exhaled. All right, boys, he said to the others. Looks like we're doing this the hard way. Emma saw the man on the left shift toward the cabin's blind side, his boots angling with practiced intent. And she understood. Whatever chance there'd been for words was gone. Before she could call out to Jack, another voice cut through the tension. Female. Clear. Steady. I can speak for myself. Thank you. The words left Emma's mouth before doubt could catch them. From her window, she saw all three men snap their attention toward her voice, hands drifting instinctively toward their guns. Ma'am, Marshal Grant called, his tone smoothing into something meant to sound kind. Are you Mrs. Emma Wynd? I am Mrs. Emma Calder, she answered, stressing the name. And I am exactly where I choose to be. Your family's worried about you, Grant said. They claim you were forced into marriage against your will. A flare of anger burned through her, sharp and sudden. My family is dead, Marshal Grant, Emma replied. The only man who ever claimed to worry about me was Victor Hale, and his concern had everything to do with money. Grant exhaled slowly. Even so, we've received reports suggesting you may be in danger. Why don't you step outside where we can confirm you're unharmed? So you can haul me back to Cedar Falls and hand me over to the banker who tried to purchase me like livestock? Emma's voice hardened, carrying clean across the clearing. I don't think so. She felt the change immediately. The way their postures shifted, the way polite restraint gave way to something colder. They'd expected a frightened woman waiting to be rescued. Instead, they were facing someone who sounded very much like she was defending her own ground. Mrs. Calder, Grant said, dropping the last of his courtesy. I'm going to have to insist. There are serious questions surrounding your marriage. Those questions belong before a court. The only serious question, Emma shot back, is why three armed men think they have the right to trespass on private land and threaten a legally married woman. From the corner of her eye, she saw Jack's shoulders move just slightly. He was fighting a laugh. The sound steadied her. And if you're concerned about my safety, she added evenly, you should know I've learned to shoot since coming to this mountain. Quite well, actually. And unlike my husband, I don't have a reputation for mercy to uphold. The threat lingered in the mountain air, heavy as a storm cloud. Grant exchanged a glance with his companions. Calculations were made, plans adjusted. All right, Mrs. Calder, he said at last. You've made your position clear. But this isn't finished. Folks in Cedar Falls won't accept your word alone, and they have the law behind them. Then come back with warrants, Emma replied. And next time, bring more men. Grant's face flushed, but after a long moment, he lifted a hand. Mount up, he told the others. We're done here. As the three men withdrew down the trail, Emma's legs finally began to shake, the rush catching up to her all at once. She had just stood down armed federal marshals, defended her home like a fortress, discovered a vein of defiance she'd never known she possessed. That, Jack said from across the cabin, his voice carrying something dangerously close to pride, was magnificent. Emma looked toward him, really seeing his face for the first time since it began. In his eyes was more than approval, something deeper, steadier, unmistakably fierce. Was that foolish? She asked quietly. Jack's mouth curved. Probably, he said. But it was also brave, and it was exactly what needed saying. Jack stepped away from the window, the rifle still in his hands, but no longer poised to fire. His shoulders remained tight. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "Next time with more men. Better plans." Emma nodded. She understood now. What they'd just faced had only been the opening move. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Days," Jack replied. "A week if luck's with us." He leaned the rifle against the wall and turned toward her, his face grave. "Emma, what I said before about having places you could run. I told you." She cut in, steady and certain. "I'm not running. This is our home. I won't let anyone take it from us." Jack reached for her hands, his rough palms warm against her skin. "Even if it means fighting? Even if people get hurt?" Emma thought of the silver locket resting against her chest, her father's last gift. She thought of the way Victor Hale had looked at her, as if she were something to be owned. She thought of this cabin, built log by Jack's hands, and how it had already become the first place that felt like home since her childhood. "Especially then," she said softly. "Some things are worth fighting for." Jack lifted her hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle enough to steal her breath. "Then we'd better be ready," he said, "because I have a feeling our quiet days on this mountain are ending." 2 days after the marshal's visit, Emma was sorting through the small pantry when she noticed a loose board behind the shelves. At first, she thought it was nothing, just a scrap of paper stuffed into a crack to block the draft. But when she tugged it free, her heart stuttered. The paper was a letter. It was addressed to her father, Eli Boone, written in Victor Hale's unmistakable hand, and dated 2 weeks before her father's death. Dark stains marred the page. Blood, unmistakable. The paper had been folded hastily, hidden by someone who knew its value. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Eli," it began, "your continued refusal to accept my generous offer leaves me no choice but to take more direct action. The debts you owe are real, and the consequences of non-payment are severe. Meet me at the old mining office tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Come alone, and we can discuss a final settlement. Fail to appear, and I will collect in ways that will prove unpleasant for all concerned. V. Hale." Emma read the letter 3 times before the truth settled in. The date matched the night before her father had been found dead in his bed, supposedly taken by fever. But there had been no illness, no warning. He'd gone to sleep and never woken. Everyone had blamed a weak heart and the strain of debt. "Jack," she called, her voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. He appeared in the doorway instantly. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. Emma watched his face as he read, saw the color drain from it, saw his jaw tighten until the muscles beneath his beard jumped. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Behind the pantry wall," she said. Someone hid it. Someone knew what it meant and wanted it kept safe. Jack turned the paper over, studying the bloodstains, the careful threat in Hale's words. "This is proof," he said grimly. "Proof of murder. Your father didn't die of fever, Emma. Victor Hale killed him. and this letter shows he planned it. Something cold and solid settled in Emma's chest. Not grief, which she'd already endured, but fury. "He murdered my father," Emma said, her voice tight with fury. "Then tried to force me into marriage to bury the truth. The debts, the auction, all of it. It was never about money. It was about keeping me quiet, making sure I never asked how my father really died." Jack studied the blood-stained letter, his expression hard. "Then the question is, who hid this here? And why in our cabin?" Emma thought through the details. The careful fold of the paper, the way it had been wedged behind a board that looked loose but wasn't. Whoever hid it knew this place, knew how to reach it unseen, and wanted the truth to surface someday. Jack nodded. "This isn't the work of someone trying to destroy evidence. It's the work of someone trying to preserve it." They spent the afternoon searching the cabin from end to end. What they uncovered only deepened the mystery. In the root cellar, hidden behind a barrel of salt pork, they found a small stash: coffee, ammunition, and a pouch of gold coins. Beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace lay another letter, written in a different hand and addressed to Jack. "If you're reading this," it began, "then Emma has found what I left for her, and you both know that Eli Boone was murdered. My name is Samuel Reed. I worked as a night clerk at Hale's Bank, and I saw things I wasn't meant to see." Emma's breath caught. "Reed, that's the girl at the auction. Lily Reed." "His daughter," Jack said quietly, continuing to read. Samuel Reed wrote that Victor Hale killed Emma's father after Eli discovered the banker had been embezzling from the town's emergency fund. When Eli threatened to expose him, Hale lured him to a late meeting and poisoned him with arsenic. The letter went on. Phantom loans, illegal foreclosures, years of fraud. Reed had documented everything, while Hale dismissed him as a harmless old cleaner. "He knew he was in danger," Jack said as he reached the end. "Hale was getting suspicious, asking who'd been near the records. So Reed hid copies of the evidence and waited." "But why here?" Emma asked. "Why our cabin?" Jack read the final lines aloud. "I've heard the stories about Jack Calder, about the Vane brothers, and why he took to the mountains. People call him a killer. I knew his father. I know the kind of man who raised him. If anything happens to me, I trust the mountain man to protect my evidence and my daughter. There's no law in Red Hollow that Hale can't buy. But there's still justice in men who remember how to protect the innocent." Tears stung Emma's eyes. She pictured Samuel Reed, a quiet clerk who risked everything to gather proof against a powerful man. "He died trying to protect his daughter," she said. And he did protect her. Jack folded the letter with care. Lily Reed was matched with a rancher, not Hale. The old man made sure she had a way out, even if he couldn't save himself. Emma turned to the window, staring at the mountains that had become her refuge. Her voice was steady when she spoke again. "We have to go back." "What?" Jack said softly. "We have to go back to Red Hollow," Emma replied. "This evidence isn't only about my father anymore. It's about every family Victor Hale ruined, every person he cheated, threatened, or silenced. We can't stay hidden up here while he keeps hurting people." Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the pale window light. "Going back means facing the marshals again," he said. "It means walking into a town where half the people think I'm a dangerous fugitive, and the rest are too afraid to stand up to Hale." "I know," Emma said, turning fully toward him. "But it also means clearing your name and mine. It means making sure Victor Hale answers for what he's done, not just to us, but to everyone. "It's dangerous," Jack said. "More dangerous than staying here and waiting to be hunted?" Emma crossed the room and took his hands. "You told me some things are worth fighting for. This is one of them. Justice for my father. Protection for people like Lily Reed. And the right to live without looking over our shoulders for marshals carrying lies." Jack searched her face, seeing the resolve there, the strength she'd grown into over these weeks. This wasn't the frightened woman in a borrowed wedding dress. This was Emma Calder, his equal, his partner. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Emma said without hesitation, before Hale tightens his grip or silences anyone else. That night they prepared with the careful focus of people who knew exactly what was at stake. Emma sealed the letters and documents in a waterproof pouch, both notes and the records Samuel Reed had hidden. Jack cleaned their rifles, checked each mechanism, and counted their ammunition twice. "There's something else we need to settle," Jack said quietly as they worked. "Once we go back down that mountain, everything changes." Emma looked up from the supplies. "What do you mean?" "Up here, we've had time," he said. "Time to let our marriage grow without eyes on us. Down there, we'll have to stand together in front of the whole town. People will judge whether what we have is real or just convenience." Understanding warmed her cheeks. "Are you asking if I'm ready to be your wife in every sense?" "I'm asking if you want to be," Jack said. "Because if we're going to convince anyone, it has to be true. No more distance, no more separate lives, partners in every way that matters." Emma thought of the past weeks, the trust that had taken root, the quiet affection, the way safety had turned into something deeper. What began as necessity had become choice. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to be your wife, Jack. Fully." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, relief, and a depth that made her breath catch. He stepped closer, cradling her face with careful hands. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Because once we cross this line, there's no turning back. You'll be mine, Emma, and I'll be yours, and no marshal or banker in the territory will change that." "I'm sure," Emma whispered, rising onto her toes to close the space between them. Their second kiss bore no resemblance to the first. Where that one had been sudden and public, born of urgency and shock, this was unhurried and intentional. Private, chosen, the kiss of two people who understood exactly what they were risking and accepted it anyway. When they finally parted, Emma felt something settle deep in her chest, a rightness she had never known. Tomorrow promised danger and uncertainty, but tonight they were simply husband and wife, bound by choice, held together by a love that had taken root in mountain air like wildflowers clinging to stone. The blood-stained letter rested on the table nearby, proof of murder and rot that would upend lives. For now, in the amber glow of the cabin, Emma and Jack held each other and readied themselves to meet whatever came next, as true partners. Dawn broke gray and cold over Elkhorn Ridge, mist pooling in the valleys like smoke from a dying fire. Emma stood on the porch one last time, watching the sunrise wash the peaks in rose and gold while Jack loaded their horses with the supplies for the descent. In her hands lay his grandfather's rifle, a weapon that had carried 3 generations through war, feuds, and frontier justice. The stock was worn smooth by time. The metal held the quiet sheen of careful care. Jack had placed it in her hands the night before, along with a leather bandolier. "My grandfather carried it in the war," he'd said, the weight of history in his voice. "My father bore it against the Vane brothers. I've used it to keep this mountain safe for 10 years. Now it's yours." Use it to protect what matters. The rifle felt heavy, not only in weight, but in meaning. Emma was no longer the helpless daughter of a debtor. She was Emma Calder, armed, resolved, ready to fight for justice. "Ready?" Jack asked, leading the horses to the front of the cabin. Emma took one last look at their home, the walls Jack had raised with his hands, the windows that caught the morning light, the porch where trust had grown in quiet evenings. It might be days before they returned. It might be never. "Ready," she said, shouldering the rifle and stepping down to her horse. The descent was treacherous in the early light, dew slicking the switchbacks and shadows, hiding loose stone and sudden drops. But the horses were mountain-bred and sure-footed, picking their way carefully toward the valley. As they rode, Jack shared what he knew of Red Hollow. Marshal Grant and his men had returned after failing to take Emma, but they'd left watchers behind, paid eyes and loose tongues. Victor Hale had hired more muscle as well. Gunmen and bounty hunters unburdened by warrants or restraint. "He's turning Red Hollow into an armed camp," Jack said as they negotiated a narrow cut. "Anyone inclined to help us has been threatened or bought. The rest are watched so close they can't breathe without Hale knowing." "What about Reverend Cole?" Emma asked. "He married us. He'll testify it was lawful, consensual." Jack's expression darkened. "Reverend Cole left town 3 days after our wedding," Jack said quietly. "Word is he was offered a better parish out in California. But folks talk. They say he looked scared when he packed up." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Victor Hale was willing to drive a preacher out of Red Hollow to silence testimony, there was no limit to what he might do to erase them for good. They rode on in thoughtful silence for the next hour, the trail widening as it dropped from the high country and merged with other paths leading down. Soon they would reach the main road, where their arrival would be noticed and reported within minutes. "There's something I need to tell you," Emma said, as they stopped to water the horses at a stream crossing. "About what happens if we don't succeed." Jack looked up from checking a hoof. "We will succeed. But if we don't," Emma went on, steady but firm. "If Hale's corruption runs deeper than we think, if the evidence isn't enough, I don't regret any of it. Not marrying you, not coming to your mountain, not choosing to fight back. Whatever happens, I'm glad I got to know the man behind the stories." Jack straightened slowly, his gray eyes intent. "Emma, let me finish," she said. "I spent my whole life being careful, doing what was expected, living by rules other people made for me. These past weeks with you, I've never felt more alive, more like who I was meant to be. You gave me that. You gave me the courage to be myself." Jack crossed the short distance and took her hands, the familiar roughness of his palms grounding her. "You always had that courage," he said softly. "I just gave you a reason to use it." He bent and kissed her, gentle, unhurried, tasting of coffee and cold water and the promise of a future neither could be sure of. When they parted, Emma felt the warmth spread through her chest, stronger now than it had ever been. "I love you," she said, the words steady and certain. Jack's voice was rough when he answered. "I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone after Rose died. You brought me back to life," Emma called her. They stood together beside the stream, the wilderness that had sheltered them murmuring all around, knowing they were about to leave it behind for a reckoning that would shape more than their own fate. The final approach to Red Hollow required care. Riding straight in would be suicide. Too many eyes, too many guns waiting for them. Instead, they circled wide, coming in from the east along the old mining road, using abandoned claims and broken sheds for cover. "Remember," Jack said as they dismounted in a stand of cottonwoods overlooking town, "first priority is getting the evidence to someone who can act. Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court is due in town today. If we reach him before Hale knows we're here, we might have a chance." Emma checked the waterproof pouch at her side, feeling the edges of Samuel Reed's letters inside. "And if we can't reach the judge? Then we make sure the whole town hears the truth," Jack said grimly. "Sometimes the court of public opinion is the only justice left." They spent the afternoon watching Red Hollow from their concealed vantage point, counting the armed men stationed at key points. Victor Hale had turned the town into a fortress. Guards posted at the hotel where Judge Harrison was staying, watchers along every road into town, and hard-eyed men lingering near the church, the general store, and anywhere the Red Hollow crowd might gather. "It's like walking straight into a snare," Emma said, tracking a rifleman pacing in front of the hotel. "Every snare has a weak point," Jack replied, lowering his spyglass. "Hale hired professionals, but they don't know this place like we do. They're covering the obvious routes. There are others." As dusk settled, they finalized the plan. Emma would go in first, slipping through the old mining tunnels that ran beneath town and connected to the basement of the Reed house, empty since Samuel Reed's death. From there, she would move toward the hotel and try to reach Judge Harrison directly. Jack, meanwhile, would raise a disturbance on the far side of town, enough to pull Hale's attention and split his men. "It's dangerous," Jack said as they prepared to part. "If something goes wrong, if they catch you before you can hand over the evidence, then you keep going without me," Emma said, steady and unyielding. "This is bigger than us now. Too many people have been hurt by Hale." Jack lifted her face, his eyes fierce in the fading light. "Promise me something. If it comes down to justice or survival, choose survival. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I've just remembered how to live." "Only if you promise the same," Emma said. "We go back to our mountain together. Or not at all." They sealed it with a kiss that tasted of resolve and fear in equal measure, then moved toward a town heavy with watchful shadows. Emma's passage through the abandoned tunnels was a trial of breath and nerve. Spaces barely wide enough to crawl, directions Jack remembered from boyhood wanderings decades earlier. The air was damp and sour. More than once she had to stop, pressing her forehead to the rock, mastering the panic that rose with the weight above her. But the path held. She surfaced in the basement of the Reed house as full dark fell, clothes smeared with grime, hands scraped raw from fallen beams. The rooms above were cold and silent, windows black, the place echoing with the memory of a man who had died for the truth. From there, Emma could see the hotel. Lamps glowing in several windows, guards silhouetted at both entrances. Getting inside would demand timing, luck, and a plan bordering on reckless. Across town, Jack readied his own move. His grandfather's rifle was loaded, his ammunition counted. He had enough to hold off a small force if he had to. But he meant to fire only if forced. His task was noise, not blood. The abandoned church on the edge of town suited him perfectly. Struck by lightning the previous summer and left to decay, its roof sagged and its bell tower still stood. From that height, he could watch the whole of Red Hollow and ring out a distraction loud enough to pull every gunman away from the hotel. As Jack climbed the crooked stairs toward the bell tower, he couldn't miss the bitter irony. He and Emma had been bound in a church beneath stained glass and hymned. Now their fate might be decided in another church. This empty shell that held nothing but dust, old prayers, and birds' nests. At exactly 9 o'clock, Emma moved. She slipped out of the Reed house and crossed the narrow alley behind the hotel, timing her steps to the guard's routine lap around the building. The back door was locked, but the window beside it was only latched. She eased it open and slid through, silent as breath. A back stairwell ran straight to the second floor. Emma climbed carefully, avoiding the one step she'd heard creak during her earlier watch. Her pulse thundered so loudly she was sure it carried down the hall. Room 7. She found it at the end, a thin blade of light cutting under the door. Emma paused, drawing in a steadying breath. Then she knocked. Soft, urgent. "Judge Harrison," she whispered. "My name is Emma Calder. I have proof of a murder you need to see." A chair scraped. Footsteps crossed the floor. A bolt slid back. The door opened on a distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair combed back, eyes sharp and awake. He took in Emma's scraped hands and dirty clothes in one swift glance. "Mrs. Calder," he said quietly, "I wondered when you'd come. Get inside, quickly." Emma stepped in, startled by his calm. "You were expecting me?" Judge Harrison shut the door and threw the bolt. "I've been hearing stories since I arrived," he said, lowering his voice. "Stories about a banker whose wealth doesn't match his books. About a woman who supposedly vanished against her will. About a mountain man who might not be what the town calls him." He looked at her steadily. "I was starting to think I'd have to dig for the truth myself." Hope surged through Emma as she drew the waterproof pouch from inside her jacket. "Then you'll want this," she said, laying Samuel Reed's letters and documents across the desk. Judge Harrison read in silence. His face hardened with each page. Blood-stained threats, ledgers, careful notes, names, dates. When he finally looked up, his expression had turned to stone. "This is devastating," he said. "If even half of Reed's account is accurate, Victor Hale has been running a criminal machine for years." "It's all accurate," Emma said. "And there's more. He murdered my father to cover his theft, then tried to force me into marriage so I'd stay quiet." Judge Harrison's eyes flashed. "If you'll swear to this under oath, I can issue warrants tonight. Real warrants, enough to end Hale's operation." Relief hit Emma so hard her knees nearly gave. They had done it. The proof was in the right hands. A crack of gunfire cut through the night. One shot, then another. Then the sharp, rapid bite of multiple rifles from across town as Jack's distraction became something far more violent than either of them had planned. "That's my husband," Emma breathed, moving toward the window. You have to stay," Judge Harrison snapped, firm as iron. "You finish your testimony. If your husband is half the man you believe him to be, he'll want you to complete what you started." More gunfire echoed. Emma pressed her palm to the glass, torn in two. Duty pulling one way, love pulling the other. Somewhere out in the dark, Jack was fighting for both their lives, trusting her to secure justice while he held the line. Judge Harrison sat, pulled paper close, and dipped his pen. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning, and don't spare a single detail." Tonight, Victor Hale's long grip on fear was finally breaking. As Emma began to give her sworn account, the sounds of gunfire still echoed through Cedar Falls, rolling off the buildings and into the dark hills beyond town. She could only pray that when the smoke cleared, she and Jack would both still be alive to witness the justice they had bled for. The church bell that had tolled for their wedding 3 weeks earlier now rang with a different meaning. This was no celebration of love, but a funeral chime for the empire Victor Hale had built on lies, theft, and blood. Judge Harrison's warrants were signed in the gray hours before dawn. By sunrise, a dozen federal marshals surrounded the banker's mansion, while the legitimate lawmen of Cedar Falls were forced to choose: stand with the law at last, or fall alongside corruption. Emma stood beside the judge on the courthouse steps, her testimony complete, her evidence formally entered into the territorial record. Morning light washed the town in gold and shadow, but Emma barely noticed. Jack was still missing. The gunfight that had torn through the night ended in a hollow, unnatural silence. No one could say for certain who had lived or died, or who had fled into the dark. "Mrs. Calder," Judge Harrison said quietly, "your courage tonight stopped crimes that hadn't even been committed yet. No matter what follows, you serve justice with honor." Emma nodded, though her eyes searched the growing crowd in the square. Word of the arrests spread fast. Doors opened, faces appeared, some satisfied, some relieved, others pale with the fear of realizing how close everything had come to ruin. "There," Judge Harrison said, pointing down Main Street. "They're bringing him out." Victor Hale emerged from his mansion in irons, flanked by 2 marshals. He no longer looked like the untouchable banker who had once tried to buy Emma like property. His clothes were rumpled and stained, his skin waxy, his eyes darting across the crowd, hunting for allies who no longer existed. The slow walk down Main Street gave the Red Hollow crowd a long-awaited reckoning. Emma watched expressions shift: anger, relief, disbelief, and quiet shame. "Where is Jack?" Emma asked Marshal Grant, who, once Judge Harrison exposed the full scope of Hale's crimes, had proven himself one of the few honest men left in uniform. "We're still searching, ma'am," Grant said, regret heavy in his voice. "Last night was chaos. Gunfire everywhere. Hard to tell who was fighting for who." Emma's chest tightened. Jack was meant to draw attention, not fight a war. If he'd been forced into a prolonged battle, if he'd been wounded, or worse. "Emma." The voice cut through her fear like sunlight through storm clouds. She turned. Jack pushed through the crowd, clothes torn, dried blood on his face, but upright. Alive. Emma ran to him without thinking, crashing into his arms so hard he nearly lost his footing. "I thought you were dead," she whispered into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of smoke and peace and mountain wind. "Takes more than a few hired guns to put a Calder in the ground," Jack said, holding her tight. "It got close, though. Hale had more men than we counted, and they were organized." Over Jack's shoulder, Emma saw Victor Hale being dragged toward the courthouse. When the banker spotted them locked together in the crowd, his face twisted into something raw and hateful. "This isn't over," Hale screamed, his voice cutting across the square. Emma tightened her grip on Jack, knowing one truth above all others. For Victor Hale, it was already finished. "You think you've won, but I have allies in high places. Connections that reach all the way to the territorial capital. I'll be free within a week, and when I am..." "Mr. Hale," Judge Harrison cut in, his voice sharp with the full weight of territorial authority. "I suggest you conserve your breath for your trial. Based on the evidence submitted this morning, you are facing charges of murder, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Your so-called friends will find it difficult to interfere once federal marshals take jurisdiction." The banker's face drained of color as the meaning settled in. Federal charges meant federal courts, far beyond the reach of bribery and local intimidation. For the first time Emma had ever seen, Victor Hale looked truly afraid. "You can't prove it," he said, but the words rang hollow. "Samuel Reed is dead. His testimony won't stand." "Samuel Reed isn't the only proof," Emma said, stepping forward, her hands steady at her sides. "We found everything he hid, Mr. Hale. All of it. Including the blood-stained letter you sent my father the night you murdered him." A gasp rippled through the red hollow crowd. Emma saw recognition flicker across familiar faces, people who had quietly questioned Eli Boone's sudden death, but had never dared speak. Victor Hale's carefully polished mask finally shattered. "You don't understand what you've done," he snarled. "The money I took, the deals I made, they kept this town alive. Without me, Cedar Falls will wither and vanish." "Better a poor town than a rotten one," Judge Harrison replied calmly. "Marshal Grant, escort Mr. Hale to his cell. We have considerable evidence to prepare before trial." As the disgraced banker was led away, the square slowly emptied, voices buzzing with disbelief and relief. Emma and Jack found themselves standing alone where their wedding and Hale's downfall had both unfolded, the church bell still looming above the street. "It's really over," Emma said, scarcely trusting the words. "The legal battle is," Jack agreed, "but there's one last thing to finish." He took her hand and led her toward the church. Inside, Reverend Cole had long since been replaced by a young priest, Father O'Brien, who was arranging the altar for morning service. "Father," Jack said, "would you be willing to perform a ceremony for us?" The priest blinked. "But you're already married. It's recorded right here." "We are married," Emma said softly, "but the first time was rushed. We'd like to say our vows again, clearly, freely, and without fear." Father O'Brien smiled, understanding at once. "It would be an honor to bless a union that helped bring justice back to this town." Standing again at the altar where everything had begun, Emma reflected on how much had changed in 3 short weeks. She was no longer a frightened woman in a borrowed dress. And Jack was no longer a man living in exile from the world. "Do you, Jack Calder, take Emma Calder as your wife, in hardship and in plenty, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jack answered, his voice unwavering. "And do you, Emma Calder, take Jack Calder as your husband, in hardship and in plenty, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Emma said, meaning it with her whole heart. When Father O'Brien pronounced them husband and wife once more, their kiss was greeted not by fear or suspicion, but by warm sunlight pouring through the stained glass, and the knowledge that they had fought, together, for love and justice. Outside, the church bell rang again, this time not as a warning, but as a celebration. The sound rolled across Cedar Falls and climbed into the high country, carrying word that justice had been done and that love had outlasted corruption. Emma and Jack stepped out of the church hand in hand, ready to return to their mountain home as true partners. Behind them, the town they had helped unshackle was already beginning the long work of healing. Ahead waited the wilderness refuge, where an unlikely bond had hardened into something strong enough to move stone. The bell kept ringing as they mounted and turned toward the trail, its bronze voice blending with birdsong, wind, and running water. The music of a world renewed by courage, devotion, and the stubborn belief that some things are worth fighting for. The reckoning that would shape their future did not come in a courtroom or the square, but on the narrow mountain path leading home. They had ridden scarcely 2 miles when 5 armed men blocked the pass, positioned where retreat was impossible. At their head stood a man Emma recognized with a sinking heart, Vincent of the Vane brothers, the youngest son of the clan Jack had faced 10 years earlier. Time had etched scars into him, but it had not dulled the hunger for revenge that had burned since that night on Calderland. "Hello, Jack," Vincent said, his voice carrying the calm that comes just before violence. "I've waited a long time for this." Jack checked his horse and eased slightly ahead of Emma, an instinctive shield. "Vincent," he replied, "I wondered when you'd find the nerve to meet me face to face." "Nerve?" Vincent laughed, the sound hollow. "You killed my father and my brothers. You ruined my family, then hid in these mountains like a coward. Don't talk to me about nerve." Emma felt the tension radiating from Jack, the iron control holding back the anger Vincent was trying to spark. She remembered the stories Jack had told her of the Vane brothers' feud, the wrongs that had driven him to bloodshed, and the burden he had carried ever since. "Your father came to my land with rope and torches," Jack said quietly. "Your brothers rode with him. I gave them a chance to leave." "You murdered them," Vincent snapped, his hand drifting toward his gun. "I defended my family and my home," Jack answered, his voice hardening. "The same as any man would. The same as you would if someone came for what was yours." Emma watched the moment tighten, knowing this meeting had been inevitable once they chose to return to the world. Vincent embodied the past Jack could never fully outrun, the violence that had forged him and driven him into exile. But the balance had shifted. Jack was no longer alone. He had someone, worth more than old grudges. And Emma had her own place in this reckoning. "Mr. Vane," she said, urging her horse forward until she stood beside Jack, not behind him. "I'm sorry for your loss, but what happened 10 years ago has nothing to do with me, and it doesn't have to end with more blood today." Vincent's gaze slid to her, sharp with equal parts curiosity and disdain. "So, this is Emma Calder," he said coolly. "The woman who married a killer and helped him slip past justice." He tilted his head. "Tell me, do you know how your husband wiped out my family? Do you know what he's capable of when the darkness takes him?" "I know what he's capable of protecting," Emma answered, her voice steady. "I know he can build something lasting instead of tearing the world apart. And I know revenge won't bring your people back or mend the hurt you've carried all these years." "Fine words," Vincent said. "They won't save him or you." The threat settled in the pass like gun smoke. Emma felt Jack stiffen beside her, readying for the violence everyone sensed coming. But she felt something else too. The weight of the silver band on her finger, forged by Jack's hands from mountain ore. He'd shaped it while she gave her testimony, hour by hour, turning raw metal into a promise. It was nothing like the borrowed dress and hurried signatures of their first vows. This ring was chosen, earned, theirs. "You're right," Emma said, slipping off her glove and lifting her hand so the ring caught the morning light. "Pretty words won't save us, but love might." She swung down from her saddle, ignoring Jack's sharp breath and Vincent's startled oath. In that narrow pass, with 5 armed men barring the way, Emma Calder did something Cedar Falls would whisper about for generations. She walked straight up to Vincent Vane and held out her hand. "My name is Emma," she said simply, "and I want to know yours. Not the name you wear for vengeance, but the one your mother used when you were small. Vincent stared at her outstretched hand, as if it might strike. What kind of trick is this? No trick, Emma said. Just a woman trying to understand why you're ready to die today over something that happened before I was born. You don't understand. I do. Emma cut in gently. I understand loss. I understand rage and the hunger for justice that curdles into revenge. I understand how grief can hollow a person until there's nothing left but anger. Her voice didn't waver. I learned that when I found out Victor Hale murdered my father. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the recognition of shared ground. Then you know why I have to do this, he said. I know why you think you do, Emma replied. But I also know the choice I made instead. I chose justice over revenge. I chose to build instead of destroy. I chose to honor my father by living a life he'd be proud of. She gestured toward Jack, who watched with the taut focus of a man ready to move at the first hint of betrayal. Your father and brothers died because they chose violence over law, revenge over justice. Don't make the same choice. Vincent's hand drifted away from his gun, though his men stayed tight and ready. You're asking me to forget 10 years of hate. I'm asking you to remember 10 years of pain, Emma said, and decide whether you want the next 10 to look the same. Wind whispered through the pines. A hawk cried high above. Emma stood alone in the center of the pass, surrounded by rifles, yet holding the moment with nothing but truth. At last, Vincent Vane looked straight at Jack. You killed them, he said simply. Yes, Jack Calder answered without hesitation. I killed them because they left me no other choice. I've carried the weight of those deaths every single day since, and I wouldn't wish that burden on any man. Vincent nodded slowly. Good. Because living with what you've done is a harsher punishment than dying for it ever could be. He motioned to his men. After a tense pause, they lowered their rifles, reluctance written on every face. We're finished here, Vincent said. But Jack, if you ever come down off that mountain again, if you ever give me reason to believe you're a danger to anyone, this conversation will end very differently. I understand, Jack replied quietly. Vincent swung into his saddle and rode past them without another word, his men following in grim silence. Emma Calder watched them vanish around the bend in the trail, then turned to Jack. He was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. What you just did, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I've seen men face down armies with less courage than you showed walking straight up to Vincent Vane. Only then did Emma feel her knees weaken now that the danger had passed. I couldn't let you face him alone, she said softly. Not when I believed there might be another way. Jack dismounted and pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the mountain wind whispered through the pines. You saved my life today, he said, not just from his guns, but from becoming the kind of man who would have killed him to protect you. Emma leaned back and searched his eyes, seeing the truth there. He would have fought. He would have added more blood to the ledger he already carried if she hadn't broken the cycle. We saved each other, she said, her fingers brushing the silver ring that caught the light like a promise made solid. That's what partners do. They mounted again and rode on toward their mountain home, leaving behind old feuds and the weight of buried violence. The ring on Emma's hand flashed in the sun, not a symbol of desperation or a bargain struck in fear, but the conscious choice of two people who had decided to build something lasting from the ashes of their pasts. Behind them, Cedar Falls continued its slow healing. Ahead waited the cabin where their love had grown strong enough to choose mercy over revenge, wisdom over rage. 1 year later, Emma Calder stood on the porch at dawn, watching the sunrise wash Elkhorn Ridge in rose and gold. Her hands rested on the gentle curve of her belly where new life stirred. Beside her, a hand-carved cradle rocked softly in the morning breeze. Jack's latest creation, shaped from mountain pine and polished smooth during long winter nights when snow pressed high against the windows. The cradle was more than furniture. It was proof of the life they had built. Chosen freely, defended fiercely, and nurtured in quiet strength. "Up early again?" Jack Calder said, stepping out with 2 cups of coffee, the ritual that had begun nearly every morning for a year. "The baby likes the sunrise," Emma replied, taking the cup. "I think he, or she, already loves this place as much as we do." Jack sat beside her on the bench he'd built along the railing, his arms settling around her shoulders as naturally as breath. Below them, the valley opened wide, mist lifting from the streams, birds calling across the canyon walls. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question now a familiar, gentle joke. Emma leaned into his warmth, smiling. "Just one," she said quietly. "I regret that it took a corrupt banker and a wedding auction to bring us together." Emma Calder said softly, "If I'd been braver, if I'd come to this mountain on my own, we might have found each other sooner. Everything happened the way it had to," Jack Calder replied, his hand settling protectively over hers on the gentle curve of her belly. "We weren't ready for each other back then. We had to be broken first, to learn what we were truly willing to fight for." Emma thought about the long road that had carried them here, the desperate gamble of that first hurried wedding, the slow, careful growth of trust and affection, the discovery of the evidence that finally brought justice to Cedar Falls. And, at last, the confrontation with the Vane brothers that closed the circle of violence shaping so much of Jack's past. Victor Hale had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison, his crimes laid bare, his victims finally acknowledged. Cedar Falls was rebuilding under honest leadership, and the people who had lived for years under fear were learning again how to trust one another. A letter from Father O'Brien had arrived the previous week, telling them that Lily Reed had given birth to a healthy son, and that her husband was proving to be a kind, steady man who honored her father's memory. Samuel Reed's sacrifice had not been in vain. His evidence had not only destroyed Hale, but had also secured his daughter's future. "Do you think we'll ever go back down to town?" Emma asked, though she already sensed the answer. "For supplies, maybe," Jack said. "For the birth, if the doctor insists." His arm tightened around her. "But this mountain is our home now. This is where our children will grow, where we'll grow old together, where we'll build something that lasts." Emma smiled at the certainty in his voice. Over the past year, they had indeed built something enduring. Not just the improvements to their homestead, but the deep partnership born from an unlikely beginning. They were no longer desperate strangers joined by necessity. They were Emma and Jack Calder, husband and wife, equals in every way that mattered. The cradle rocked gently beside them, waiting for the child who would be the first living proof of their love. Jack had carved it with the same care he brought to everything he made. Every joint fitted with the precision of a man who knew that the most important things deserved patience and skill. "Have you thought about names?" Emma asked, a question they returned to often as the time drew closer. For a boy, Jack said. Maybe Eli, after your father. He paused, his voice softening. For a girl, maybe Rose, after my mother. Tears pricked Emma's eyes at the generosity of the thought. He wanted their child to carry both their histories, to be rooted in the lives that had shaped them before they found each other. Eli Calder, she said, testing the sound. Rose Calder. Both names felt right. Strong, gentle, and perfectly suited to a child who would grow up in this place. They sat together in easy silence as the sun climbed higher, gilding the peaks and chasing the shadows from the valleys. This was their time, their place, their hard-earned peace, won through trials that had tested them alone and together. High above, an eagle circled on the morning thermals, its cry echoing off the mountainsides like a blessing. Emma watched it soar and thought about the freedom they had found in this wild land, about how love had given them wings to rise beyond the circumstances that first bound them together. I love you, Jack Calder, she said, the words carrying the weight of a year of mornings just like this. I love you too, Emma Calder, he answered, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. Between them, the cradle rocked gently, waiting for the child who would grow up knowing, without doubt, what it meant to be truly loved, truly wanted, and truly safe. Around them, the mountain stood timeless and watchful, both refuge and inheritance, shelter and promise woven into one. Down in the valley, Cedar Falls continued its slow healing. Up here on Elkhorn Ridge, two people who had found each other by accident and courage prepared to welcome new life into a world they had reshaped by choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and building over destroying. Sunrise washed their faces in gold as they spoke of the future, the gardens they would plant, the rooms they would add to the cabin, the stories they would one day tell their children about the morning a mountain man stepped into a church and changed two lives forever with a simple, honest confession. I haven't seen a woman in 10 years. Some love stories begin with sweeping gestures and thunderous vows. Others start in desperation and grow strong through patience, bravery, and the daily choice to see the best in another soul. Emma and Jack Calder had lived both truths. As they watched the sun lift over their mountain kingdom, they knew they had found something richer than gold, sturdier than reputation, and stronger than every force that had tried to keep them apart. The cradle rocked softly in the morning breeze, waiting for the next chapter of their unlikely story. A story that began with a kiss and a promise, tested by fire and faith, and carried forward by trust. In the distance, the church bell of Cedar Falls tolled the hour, its bronze voice drifting faintly up the mountain air, a reminder of where their journey began and a blessing on where it would lead. Love, after all, was not only the moment two people found each other, but the countless moments afterward when they chose, again and again, to build something beautiful together. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of seasons yet to come, children to raise, and a lifetime of mornings like this one. Emma closed her eyes and listened to the music of their home. The gentle creak of the cradle, the far-off cry of eagles, the low murmur of Jack's voice as he planned improvements to the homestead. And beneath it all, the steady rhythm of two hearts that had learned to keep time together. This, she realized, was happiness. Not the grand scenes she once read about in novels, but the quiet contentment of two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day. It was coffee shared at dawn, hands finding each other without thought, and the deep certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The baby stirred within her, as if answering the calm that filled its mother's heart. Emma smiled and rested both hands over the small life growing inside her, imagining the day she would lay their child in the cradle Jack had carved with such care. "Do you think our story gets a happy ending?" she asked. Though she already knew, Jack turned to her, his gray eyes warm with a love tempered by trial and truth. "Mrs. Calder," he said, lifting her hand and kissing the silver ring that caught the light like trapped starlight, "I think our story is just getting started." The cradle swayed gently between them as the sun climbed higher over Elkhorn Ridge, blessing their mountain sanctuary with gold and the promise of shared tomorrows. Far off, life went on, seasons turning, flowers blooming, rivers running to the sea. But here on their mountain, time seemed to pause long enough for two people to honor the miracle of finding exactly what they hadn't known they were seeking. Some stories end with a kiss, others end with a vow. The best ones end with the understanding that every ending is only a beginning. Emma and Jack Calder had found their peace in each other, and as they sat together watching dawn paint their world in rose and gold, they knew the greatest adventures still awaited, written not in spectacle, but in the quiet heroism of choosing love, day after day, for the rest of their lives. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer: these stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deep fakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.